Today's first panel will be discussing the political arena ahead of upcoming national elections in Iraq. We're going to be discussing a range of topics, including the coordination framework and the scene ahead of next year's elections. I'd like to remind everyone that this is an on-the-record session. This will be live streamed and is available later online. If you need simultaneous translation, there are headsets available. Oh yeah, I do need the laptop. There are headsets available. So we encourage attendees to tweet using the hashtag Iraq Initiative, and we also encourage online attendees to submit questions online. So we're going to begin with a discussion with His Excellency Dr. Haider al-Abadi, who served as Iraq's Prime Minister between 2014 and 2018. It was one of Iraq's most tumultuous periods, as we well know. So I'd like to introduce him. He's joining us online via Zoom. We're lucky enough to have him here today because he's also a leading figure in the Shia coordination framework. So, Dr. Haider, I'd like to start with a sort of question about how do you sort of see, how stable is the governing coalition going into next year's elections? Can the coordination framework withstand the individual ambitions of its key players who seem to be at odds? I'm thinking in particular about Prime Minister Soudani, who appears to be under attack with a sort of series of deep fakes and spying scandals and corruption files. Will the coordination framework weather the storm and be able to keep Iraq stable?
Well, good morning for everybody. It's here in Baghdad this afternoon, a sunny afternoon. Of course, we have curfew today because of the census for today and tomorrow. So I'm working from home in my casual thing, not official. I can see everybody's official there. Okay. These are very, very important questions, and they are difficult, especially with the current international moments, which will entail transformation and maybe outcomes. There are historic moments, and I think Iraq now is facing one of these historic moments. There has been plenty in the past. Some of them are failures, some of them are success. But the current international moment is a pivotal, and it is, I think, is transformative, historic, and maybe will give birth to a new reality for many international dossiers or files. Of course, it is a moment of cautious anticipation, maybe moments of pessimism and optimisms. I can see a lot of people are optimists and many other people are pessimists about what's going to happen next. Of course, the outcome will await more than one international arena, from Europe, Southeast Asia, passing through the Middle East. The Middle East is the most dangerous, I think, focus for international security and peace at the moment. Outcomes of the moment. I think, do you want me to answer just your question, or do you want me to carry on?
No, feel free to make your own remarks. I'm sure you have
something
prepared. Please feel free to make your own remarks.
Okay. Now, of course, there is not one entity now in government. I think the framework is one of the entities which has developed the government and maybe is supporting it, or some elements of the framework are not supporting it at the moment for different reasons. So I think there is one deadlock, but on the other hand, everybody think that a weakened Iraq and a weakened government is not to their advantage, is not to their interest. So it is a very conflicting status quo at the moment. On one side, everybody think that they will be successful if the government succeed. On the other side, there is interpolitical quarrel, and everybody is looking at their own interests in that regard. So this is, I think, the outcome may be explosive, anxious, maybe stable, will be determined by the nature of the policy, especially the new American policy, the new Trumpism in the next few months. We have to wait and see. People are expecting, and they don't know what's going to come up with it. Of course, the nature of reactions and policies whether they are identical in line, whether they are containment, or whether they are counter on the opposite side. The centers of international and regional power dealing with American actor, I think it has to have an impact now in Iraq. Of course, Europe may be on the same line. The wrong handling of the situation can give rise to many problems in Iraq. Each international and regional file has its own specificity, complexities, and agendas as well. And it is wrong to give similar rules to the files of terms, whether it's visions, solutions, settlements, or deals. Just as it is wrong to recycle crises or leave them to interact or adopt, have solutions, or employ them for momentary interests, like what happened in 2013, which gave rise to the influence of Daesh and the control of the terrorists of major lands in Iraq and Syria at the time, which has threatened the security of the Middle East and the security of the world at large. Or employ for monetary interests without strategy. Maybe if there are actors now who will employ certain strategies or certain policies without strategy, it can backfire in this regard. Now, there may be a logic of the victor or with an ideological mind or according to the standards of bias, patchwork, or experimentation. I think this is very dangerous in the Middle East. Middle East is full of history, full of competition, and people don't seem to be walking out or away from their historical or ideological backgrounds in this regard. So it's very dangerous not to be careful in this regard. Of course, Iraq in the current moment, although the world is interconnected and international influence have become like vessels that are discussed in terms of mutual interest. However, I am concerned here with talking about my country, Iraq, in the midst of this important transformation moment. This is what I would like decision makers to hear from me and those who deal with the consequences of this critical historical moment and build on it in the future, especially the new American actors. I say it is wrong to deal with Iraq as a marginal country. And it is also wrong and a sin to structurally link Iraq to thorny regional issues, such as the Iranian issue or the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, or to leave Iraq without rehabilitation, support, and protection in the midst of a complex and explosive region. I believe that resolving many regional issues will depend on the nature of dealing with the Iraqi experience. If we deal well with the Iraqi issue, which succeeded in establishing itself at the state level, but of course failed at the managerial, at the regime level, after the fall of the dictatorial regime in 2003. Many didn't expect this current status quo to continue from 2003, but it did. We have passed 20 years now, and the status quo of the regime and the state continued, although it is failed. My vision is, as a politician and a former prime minister, is summarized in the following axes. Number one, Iraq is a pivotal country in the Middle East due to its geopolitical and geosocietal location linking three nations, Arabs, Turks, and Persians. And this final fate will be directly affect the map of the cohesion or collapse of the sovereign geography of these nations. Here lies the importance of Iraq, whether cohesive or collapsing, which must be realized and employed in managing the regional and international political process. Number two, due to its actual situation, Iraq currently constitutes a geopolitical depression between the three nations, Arabs, Turks, and Iranians. So it is the focus of their conflicts and agendas as well. Due to overlap of regional and international issues, Iraq is politically, economically, is a source of conflict for the international axis concerned with the region. Number three, the friction between the interests of international and regional strategies at the expense of Iraq has reached a dangerous level, in actual fact, maybe exploding level. And Iraq is today paying the price for being an arena for achieving interests, settling scores, or passing deals at the expense of its sovereignty, existence, and interests. And we'll wait and see what's going to happen in the next year. The conflict of regional and international containment guidance and employment strategies has produced polarization and intense conflict between Iraqi political forces or groups, which are for the most part identical to the visions, agendas, and interests of these strategies of the others, unfortunately. Number five, there are three hypothetical models of the Iraqi state as a result of Iraqi conflicts, regional conflicts, and international conflicts. The models are A, the failed state model as a system, interest and sovereignty. This is a possibility. B, the model of the state of bias towards one of the strategies, whether it is regional or international, its influence and its interest. C, the model of the state of strategical balance and the national interests of its own people. The two models, the failed and the bias, cannot continue due to the nature and location of Iraq and due to the intensity of polarization between the major regional and international strategies in the region in additional to local players. This, unfortunately, is overseen or bypassed by many decision makers at the international and regional level, unfortunately. The result is a massive Middle East choice whose extent cannot be predicted. Number six, dealing with Iraq on the basis of the failed state model or the biased state is a strategy which is a strategic sin, not only against Iraq, but against the region and against the whole Middle East and its countries and against international peace and security at large. Iraq must be a state of strategical balance, in my opinion, and that's what I tried to do during my reign 2014, 2018. There were a lot of success and there were some failures at the time. First, it is in the interest of Iraq, the countries of the region, and the world to establish a unified Iraq that constitutes in itself a real strategical weight that balances the strategies in the region between many conflicting regional interests and imposes a balance between them in a way that prevents their deadly collisions, whether in Iraq or in the Middle East. Second, the state of strategical balance requires the establishment of a strong Iraqi state, socially, politically, economically, and militarily, capable of preserving itself and at the same time achieving a positive balance between the strategies of the region, which is the best model for Iraq and the region, in my opinion. Third, Iraq cannot achieve the model of the state of strategical balance without a positive, integrated, and supported internal and external policy, which can be summarized as follows. A, or number one, centralization, crystallization, and effectiveness of the national democratic political system, away from the system of sectarian, ethnic states, which is at the expense of the system of multiple centers of power that shares power, sovereignty, and interest with the state. Number two, creating a solid core of governance that imposes the unity, sovereignty, and interest of the state and the people by the force and the power of law, and firmly prevents choice, diligence, adventure, or dependence on any foreign strategy. Number three, continuing radical reforms of the state's administrative, economical, security, educational, and development structures to create effective governance and a successful state. Number 4, deep awareness and smart policy that takes into account the legitimate interests of regional and international strategies as much as possible on the basis of serving mutual interests between different parties, which ensures positive containment and generates regional and international understanding that a unified, strong, and peaceful Iraq will preserve positive interests.
Dr. Haider, we only have you for a very brief moment, so I was wondering if you could...
I'm almost there. I'm almost there.
Okay, if you could just answer the question when you, after the sentence about the coordination framework, because we're particularly interested in hearing about how the coordination framework sees the political landscape ahead of next year's elections.
Exactly, a clear roadmap to protect and nurture the model of the Iraqi national civil state from self-destruction or external predation until the state institution is embedded and is powerful enough to deal with the major challenges. That is the key. We have to build state institutions, and this will take time. And we must be very careful to build them correctly, and they must be nurtured and supported over time. And this is the key question. Can we continue on an ad hoc policy, which will face crisis after crisis, without building our own national institutions of the state? Can we control unorganized armament of different groups in the country without the control of the state? I mean, the state must have full control over the arms inside the country. Especially, I'm not talking about persons, I'm talking about groups. Otherwise, there are states like the US, which persons and individuals, they can carry arms, but not groups within the state itself. So this is a major question. The other one is, can we reorganize the state in a way that we look for the interests of the people rather than the interests of the party? The party, in my view, would deliver or would achieve its interests when it serves the people, not the opposite. Not when the people serve the interests of the party, which is what's happening at the moment. So these are major questions now, whether they will be solved in next election. But my opinion is this. Unfortunately, in the past, elections didn't solve many problems. In actual fact, they gave rise to many other problems because of differing views on the result of the elections, on the election commission itself, on how the elections has gone, and whether there is enough oversight on election procedures. I mean, there are individuals and parties who are spending, millions of US dollars in their election campaign without anybody asking them questions. Where they got that money from is mainly from the state itself, using the state infrastructure for election aims. I think it shouldn't continue. So this is a major question. Now, in the last election, which is the regional election, I think it went smooth without much contradiction or disputes, and it went almost very quick and smooth, and there was a lot of deals which has enabled local authorities to develop or to govern themselves smoothly. Whether it is now successful or not, that's a different question. Now,
Thank you, Doctor. I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there because we've got only a short period of time for the rest of the panelists. But thank you so much for your remarks, and I'm sure the audience really appreciated them.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to turn to the panel today. Since we're short on time, I'm going to skip introductions. You see everyone's name is present on the tables and in the programs. So I'd like to begin with Falah, if we can. So following the October elections in the KRI, can you share your perspectives on the current political dynamics within the Kurdistan region?
Well, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. In fact, this election was important. It was the 6th parliamentary election in Kurdistan region. We have started the journey back in 1991. So it's almost over 30 years of experience in governing Kurdistan region. Certainly the political landscape in the country has evolved in the way that we have seen the result of this. There are a number of points which are important to highlight. First, this was governed and conducted by independent High Electoral Commission from Baghdad, which was not KHEC, it was IHEC. So therefore, it was important for people not to, again, criticize those who were in power in Kurdistan region, claiming the nature of the process. Second, the turnout. The turnout was high and exceeded the expectations, which was important for people still. It shows the degree of maturity in the public, but also the importance of the election, which means still they believe in the transfer of power through the ballot boxes. Still they believe there is a chance for improving the situation, and that's the right way to go about it. We do believe that democracy is not only about the elections, but the aftermath of the elections and what happens. The results of the election tell us that it is a challenging time. There are pressing issues, and the political parties in Kurdistan need to engage immediately in constructive dialogue in order to reach an agreement on forming a government that would be responsive to the expectations of the people. When people went out to vote, they have expectations from the political parties. Each party ran on a campaign and based on their slogans. Now, people's expectations are such that these parties should work in order to fulfill the obligations. So we believe it's important for us to form a government as soon as possible. First, to prepare ourselves for the next year's Iraqi election, but second, to deal with the challenges that are happening in the region as a whole, because we live in an interconnected world. But I was surprised really by His Excellency, former Prime Minister, mentioning Arabs, Turks, and Iranians, not mentioning Kurds. Okay, saying nations, okay, nations, if you mean states, that's acceptable. But nations, in our definition, we are a large nation living in the 4 countries that are there, Iraq, Syria, Turkey, and Iran. We also care about the developments. We care about the future of the country. We care about which direction is Iraq is heading. So therefore, we need, in Kurdistan region, to have a kind of a common vision. Where are we heading to, and what do we want to achieve? But also for Iraq, together with the other partners in Iraq, to see what kind of Iraq do we want. 21 years have passed since the fall of the former regime. Where are we? Have we responded to the needs and expectations and aspirations of the people? Is Iraq better today in terms of services, job opportunities, security, et cetera, et cetera? Is there a chance to renew the trust of the people? So these are questions that need to be answered. But certainly the perspective from Kurdistan region is that this was a big success. We thank IHEC. We thank the Iraqi Prime Minister, the Judiciary Council, the Federal Court for their support in helping this process to go smoothly. But Prime Minister's visit to Erbil last week, the 4th since he took office, is an important thing that we are all together in this process. So therefore, a strong functioning relationship between Erbil and Baghdad is key for stability in the country.
How do you see the dynamics between the KLG and Baghdad, given it's been a relatively tumultuous few years? Let's not go into the Supreme Court's decision and sort of oil decision. But I think if you could sort of give us a perspective from the KLG on how you perceive that relationship going forward.
Another comment on His Excellency's comments, he did not mention the Constitution. He did not mention federalism. He did not mention power sharing in the country. We have a constitution. We in the Kurdistan region are fully committed to the constitution and to the political agreements that we have reached that addresses the issues of power sharing, wealth sharing, hydrocarbons, oil and gas, and salaries. So therefore, we need to reach an understanding and an agreement on how can we go. Erbil and Baghdad relation is key for stability in the country. Iraq which is in peace within itself, can be in peace with its neighbors as well. Talking about an Iraq that can live together with the neighbors is not enough. Iraq needs to live in peace with its own communities. Iraq is not monolithic. In Iraq, we have Shias, we have Sunnis, we have Kurds, we have Turkmen, we have Chaldean, Assyrian. We all live together in this geographic boundary. So therefore, it is important for us to reach an agreement. What kind of Iraq do we want? What kind of future do we want? There is a new generation in Iraq in governance today. If we go back to 2003, many of the leaders who were there, they are no longer there or in the front scene. So therefore, we need to know this. Erbil Baghdad is key for stability, but also we can help ourselves and we can help our friends and partners in the international community who can help us.
What kind of Iraq do you want?
Free, federal, democratic, pluralistic, inclusive country that can represent its people, that can work for the safety and security of the people, and that can respond to the needs and expectations of its people. An Iraq that we can proudly say we are Iraqis, that we are not marginalized, we are not excluded, we are part of the decision makers, and we are partners, not participants and guests in Baghdad.
Thank you so much for those remarks. I'd like to turn to Sajjad. So how do you see the dynamics within the coordination framework and the Shia coordination framework's relations with other political blocs? I'm thinking in particular about the Kurds and also the Sunnis.
Thank you, Raya. I think the experience of 2021 and 2022 was very bitter for the coordination framework leaders. They were almost excluded from power. They did very badly in the elections. A lot of recriminations between themselves over why the results turned out the way they did. They failed in their challenge to overturn the election results, and they were close, just a few MPs short of a president being elected in parliament and then a government being formed without most of the coordination framework. And so since they managed to turn it around through various political maneuvers, I think they have gone about trying to prevent that situation from ever occurring again. And so partly I think they have tried to present a united political front. Former Prime Minister mentions, vision of what they want for Iraq, what they want for Iraq in the region. And I think the coordination framework leaders are trying to present themselves as statesmen. I think they are making an effort. And obviously trying to differentiate themselves between those who have political wings, those who aspire to be part of government and to have a stable Iraq, and other Shia leaders who don't have political parties, who only have armed groups and are maybe having different agendas, let's say. And so part of this effort to stabilize their hold over power, but also to prevent a situation like 2021 occurring again, was punishing the people that took part in that majoritarian effort government. And that included the former speaker, Mohammed al-Halbousi, of course. I think there's two elements to that. The first was to punish Halbousi for attempting to move forward with this effort to form a majoritarian government. That was firmly an effort led by the coordination framework. But secondly, I think also the fact that Halbousi tried to marginalize the other Sunni leaders, exclude them from power. And I think they also wanted him, probably even more so than the coordination framework leaders, to have him removed from the speakership. And I think this is a lesson, maybe, that power sharing is here to stay. It's very difficult to imagine a majoritarian government being formed and to have certain parties being excluded. I think it's almost set in stone now that you have to have two different Kurdish parties, at least two different Sunni alliances, and 3, 4, 5 major Shia parties in power. To exclude any one side, it looks to be very difficult, especially when we have parties that control territory, parties that have arms or that control specific sectors. It seems almost impossible to exclude them, no matter how badly they do in the elections. So I think that's been cleared up now. That after next year's elections, the coordination framework is not going to be in a position, no matter what they do in elections, they're not going to be in a position where someone's going to exclude them from power. That was the threat initially in 2021, 2022. Obviously, there are internal frictions within the framework. They still compete against each other for share of resources and power. In elections, I doubt that they will suddenly unify. I think they will continue to participate against each other as rivals. But obviously, I think they have partners from the Sunni parties. They have partners from the Kurdish parties. It's enough to form a government, but as Kak Falah says, it's not enough to stabilize Iraq. There's more that's required. And I think the framework is still in that phase where they're trying to mature in terms of what they're trying to do. I think Prime Minister Soudani has done a good job of maintaining stability as much as he can, but he's also become a threat to the coordination framework. That's quite clear, because he has ambitions of running the elections, because he's quite popular. He's succeeded in the eyes of the Iraqi public in terms of being able to improve some basic services, to show that his government is willing to change things up in terms of delivery. They had a 3-year budget approved, which is a first. And his relationships with international partners, with local partners, appear to be, well, the unknown dynamic, let's say, is the Sadrists. If they come back into power next year, if they compete in elections, how will the framework react? If the Sadrists do well, how will the framework react? If the Sadrists don't do so well, how will the Sadrists then allow a government to be legitimized with their presence in the political process? So there's still some unknowns. And what does the Prime Minister do? Does he take part in elections? Does he compete against the framework that nominated him to the position? So there's some dynamics of friction, I would say, that are ahead of us. But I would say people are pleasantly surprised at the fact that the coordination framework has managed to maintain some stability in the country over the past 2 years. And generally, the government is seen to be positive and has exceeded expectations, I would say. So all in all, it's not a bad effort over the past 2 years, but we haven't seen many reforms as well. And I think that's been a bit disappointing to a lot of onlookers, that high oil prices have maintained for the last 2 years, and yet we haven't really seen much economic reform. So the coordination framework may point to the fact that they want another term, they want another prime minister in power for the next 4 years, and they will get the chance to enact some reforms. But unfortunately, I'm not so confident that Iraq is conducive to reforms at this moment in time.
You mentioned stability, but I'm thinking about the legislative agenda that's been pushed forward in the last couple of years. I mean, we've seen a sort of crackdown on civil society. There's upcoming draft laws on personal status and the NGOs that have a lot of rights activists concerned. Do you think that that's an agenda they're going to keep pushing through if they are to sort of succeed in next year's elections? How do you see that shaping?
I mean, it's very natural to expect the coordination framework to use their numerical advantage in Parliament to their benefit. And part of that is an appeal to a conservative base. Part of it is also being able to restrict challenges from civil society. And I think that's, some people within government may point to the need for maintaining, control of security, preventing NGOs from doing things that, are illegal, for example. But partly, I think it's just a reaction to what happened in October 2019, and then the fact that civil movements in Iraq have the ability to organize, have the ability to engage people, organize protests, to challenge government. That is generally something that, not just in Iraq, the whole Middle East is not comfortable with. And I think while they have the advantage in Parliament, while they have the numbers, I think it's fairly natural to expect that they will continue to enact more legislation heading into elections that look to restrict some freedoms, that look to challenge the ability of civil society to counter government in some instances. But also I think it's about cementing control of institutions as well, right? Things like, the DG level of ministries, independent institutions, electoral commission that was already mentioned, even things like armed forces and judiciary. A lot of these appointments are approved through Parliament, and having that advantage in Parliament allows you to then control institutions, influence them for the next election cycle. So, I mean, coming back to this question, even if the Sadrists came back into power next year, they would face a host of institutions that are controlled by elements that are friendly or belong to the coordination framework. And I think that's a long-term effort to try to extend power throughout state institutions.
Thank you, Sajjad. I mean, I think that leads us into a point that we want to discuss, which, we're thinking about the consolidation of power by the coordination framework over the state and its institutions, as you just mentioned. So, Renard, I'm wondering if you could assess how the coordination framework has consolidated power and what that means for stability and accountability in Iraq.
Yeah, thank you. If you go to Iraq today, many would see a different Iraq in Baghdad and other countries. The words being used are stability, sovereignty is used by the government, normal is used by the government. They want normal relations. The government makes it very clear to look at the infrastructure being built, the bridges, the cafes, the life in Baghdad and other cities. And I think part of why we've seen this is there has been a consolidation of power in the last few years with under the Shia coordination framework with a very clear agenda in mind, which is to respond to shocks that they've experienced in the last few years. Part of it, as Sajjad was saying, was that shock from their own internal public, which was Tishreen, and to sort of make sure that shock doesn't occur again. And the other shock was what Muqtada Sadr tried to do with the majority government that Sajjad mentioned. I'm sort of, the comment made by the former Prime Minister, Haider Abadi, that elections are a problem is interesting, because the way that the Iraqi system is set up is for this fragmentation to exist, is to stop any consolidation by any strongman to come back and control the system, so that the parties every 4 years come back together and renegotiate who gets what. In this particular government, we've seen, as Sajjad was saying, the coordination framework really consolidate power over the ministries, over the judiciary, over sort of different institutions. So the question then is, elections are a shock. Elections are really the way that this consolidation will be challenged next year, because back to the table will be the people who they have kind of excluded for now. And so in the longer term, what does consolidation actually look like? In a way, there is a machine being built in Iraq. This stability that we see today is on top of the ability to ensure that politics, whether it's civil society or opponents, will not shake them up again. But it's very interesting to kind of understand this move towards authoritarian sort of styles of governance will be pushed back by the very elections and the kind of competitive nature of the Iraqi state. So what that means, to answer your question, for accountability is it's very unlikely that the ruling in Iraq will be held to account. There will be accountability to the rule of law. This is a state of impunity. This is a state in which they create the government, they set the government, power is negotiated informally, but formal power is negotiated. That then crashes, as we've seen for the last 20 years, or is something different happening today? And I think the next year and the elections will really see, how, to see the extent to which the coordination framework is able to maintain this consolidation vis-a-vis the gains they have made in the last few years, will really tell what trajectory Iraq is on.
I mean, you mentioned stability, and it's a word that gets used a lot with regards to Iraq in the last couple of years. I mean, how do you assess that stability, given even in the last year, as regional conflict has sort of spiraled out of control, some would say, Iraq has been dragged into it, or certain factions within Iraq have willingly put themselves into it. So what does that stability mean when, earlier this year we saw even an attack on Erbil, we saw, multiple US strikes on Fasa'id in Baghdad. I mean, what does that actually mean when we say stability?
I mean, relative to other countries, its neighbors in the region, Iraq thus far has been, insulated from the regional conflict, given that the other countries where you have an axis of resistance, Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, and Yemen, have faced far more sort of strikes. I think Iraq has been kept insulated. We don't know. I mean, there's a big question as to what will happen from now on for that insulation. But until now, it's kept insulated. And so stability in this sense is a relative term, relative both to Iraq's recent history and to the sort of what is happening in the region. And so, yeah, I think this is something, and the government has really tried to push this, has tried to maintain a Iraq that has normal relations with all the neighbors. With the US, they've renegotiated this partnership, even though you have these groups within Iraq that are part of this wider transnational conflict.
Why do you think, I mean, there seems to have been two phases to the Hashed's involvement in the conflict regionally in the past year. You had the sort of October to February phase before the Tower 22 attack, where you saw a sort of proliferation of attacks on US installations. And then post that period, you have a sort of much quieter few months where although the Islamic resistance in Iraq has taken credit for multiple attacks on Israel, they haven't, people have been describing it as a more quiet moment. So why exactly do you think that is? What was the calculus there?
I mean, both the government of Iraq sort of wanted to make the point that they are staying out of this in terms of the conflict. But also, I think, interestingly, although Iraq is the playground for the US-Iran conflict, often, the US and Iran were both on the same page when it came to, let's keep Iraq out of this. Until recently, it was clear that Iran needed Iraq to be stable from the wider thing. I mean, Iran's allies in Lebanon and in Palestine were being targeted, and Iraq is on Iran's border. Iran has learned how important Iraq is for Iran's, not forward defense, but actually, defense there. Iraq is an important economic asset for Iran and the axis of resistance, of course. And so for all these reasons, Iran wanted Iraq to stay stable. And the US, October 7th happened as the Biden administration was effectively saying, the Middle East is as safe as it's ever been. We have managed to bring stability to the region. And Iraq was a big symbol of that. We are withdrawing from Iraq. And the Middle East, look, Jake Sullivan's Foreign Affairs article, which had to be changed. But nonetheless, both these countries, in a way, have had thus far a mandate to make sure Iraq doesn't become the scenes that we've seen, the destruction that we've seen from Israel in Lebanon or in Gaza or in the West Bank.
Thank you, Renard. I'd like to turn to Mina. What's your assessment of the Iraqi state, given all of the developments over the past year, the big infrastructure projects, the sort of Sudanese glowing premiership? How do you, has the state become stronger or weaker?
Thank you, Raya. It's great to be back at Chatham House. The state is weaker. Now, that is despite everything we've heard about stability, because it's stability based on certain assumptions. Assumption one, that it's okay for election results to be discarded and for political horse trading to happen, and that becomes the norm as a result of one of the lowest or the lowest turnout we've had for elections. It is also accepted that corruption has become the system and that that's how business is done in Iraq. It is okay for head of parliament to be removed. We have a vacuum of over a year. We're bringing a former head of parliament who left saying that he was not well enough to continue his previous terms. So the state, we're not asking about the Iraqi government, we're not asking about the political system, we're asking about the state. The state is weaker. Transparency International still lists Iraq as 154 from 180 in terms of ranking for corruption, one of the lowest in the world, in terms of the worst scores possible. In the past year, it didn't get worse, but it didn't improve, which means stagnation is actually a deterioration of the state. In addition to that, the decision of war and peace is not coming from the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, rather the axis of resistance and what will happen. And in a very precarious past 14 months, devastating, heartbreaking for the entire region and for many, many Iraqis who feel tied very much to what happens in Palestine and what happens in Lebanon, has been devastating. And yet when they're looking towards where Iraq will stand on this, it's detached from where the axis of resistance may act as opposed to the government. So all of that, I think, weakens the Iraqi state.
Could you give us a bit of a perspective from the region? Because obviously being based in Abu Dhabi, you have a different perspective on some of the players in the room. So I'm curious what's the perception of Iraq in the region, and has it changed in recent times? And I guess to tack on to that, do you think Iraq can continue to remain insulated, to use Renard's word, from the sort of Israeli expansionist war in the region?
Inshallah, it will remain insulated.
Yeah.
I think there are so many red lines that have been crossed in the past 14 months. It's really hard to say, well, actually, logically speaking, Iraq should stay insulated. It's in the US's interest, it's in Iran's interest, and certainly in Iraq's interest to stay insulated. And yet, we've had terrible attacks on Iraq also. I mean, let's not forget the January attack on Erbil, which we were speaking about earlier before the session began. That was quite something, to have these strikes in the heart of Erbil. Of course, we've had repeated strikes on different areas of Iraq. So while largely, yes, insulated, but hard to see where it goes. I would say how Iraq is seen. I mean, the vast majority of Arab officials that you speak to are rooting for Iraq to succeed, because there is an understanding that without Iraq being stable and without Iraq being conflict-free, everything else bleeds into the regional dynamics. And given how precarious the situation is, they need Iraq to be stable. So I do think the vast majority of Arab countries are rooting for Iraq, not necessarily to be strong and for the state to be strong and be seen, perceived as a threat, but certainly to be stable and growing and prosperous. And I do think there are economic benefits, and we've seen, and credit to the current government, previous governments, trying to say, actually, you have more strategically to gain from Iraq being stable and a development path, and the Prime Minister's efforts really on this particular issue with the project with Turkey and Qatar and the UAE to have Al-Fao linking all the way up to Turkey. So I think there's interest in that working for sure. But of course, there's always concern about Iran, how much is Iraq in Iran's orbit? And there's the issue of trust, how much can they trust officials coming and making certain promises and pledges to actually be able to see them through. They might have the best will in the world, but actually they are not the ultimate decision makers. And that goes back to the weakness of the state, reflecting on Iraq's dynamic within the region. Certainly, I'd say the issue of identity politics, I was smiling earlier on the panel, we were talking about, there are Sunnis and Shias and Kurds and Christians. The reality is people want to see Iraqis as Iraqis, and I think many Iraqis, and we saw that in 2019, the Tishreen movement was a real emblematic moment where everyone was like, again, this Iraqi identity, and I think there's still respect for that. You say I'm, as you mentioned, from Abu Dhabi. It was incredible to see how much, for example, the UAE cared about the reconstruction in Mosul, and the Jami' al-Nouri, inshallah, the Manarat al-Habbat will be rising again very soon. You have the churches, Sa'a and al-Tahira, being reconstructed. Think, why would the UAE care about that particular element? But it's the symbolism of Iraq being such a rich country in terms of the heterogeneous element, and that's what we need in the region. None of these countries are homogeneous in various ways. And so if Iraq can make it work and can move away from sectarian identity politics, which seems almost impossible now because stability is seen rooted in that, which is wrong, in my opinion, very wrong, then the region is looking to that, and can they make a heterogeneous kind of social fabric work at a time when we see it's under so much stress, especially if the Palestine issue is going to be hijacked in sectarian lines, which it shouldn't be, and it really isn't. And I think that's something also that Israel is trying to hit, not only in Lebanon, but also in Iraq and the wider region.
Thank you, Mina. I think not strong but stable is a great tagline for I'd like to turn to questions from the audience. And just a reminder, we have a chat online if those of you watching online would like to contribute questions. So there are microphones floating around, and for whoever wants to ask questions, if you could first introduce yourself to the panelists. We have a first question here. Who's bringing the microphone?
Hello, everyone. My name is Zaman Sharki. I'm an active member of the Iraqi parliament now. So my question, I think, goes for all of you guys. Do you think that without militia control, that make a difference in Iraq towards a prosperous future? I mean, without controlling militia, can we really reach somewhere? Thank you.
Who'd like to take that one?
No.
Okay. Would you like to elaborate? No?
I think it's a rhetorical question.
It might be a rhetorical question, but does it spark anyone's ideas, any debate? That would be a resounding no.
I think without the monopoly over the use of arms, no country can really succeed in the long term. So it's an important question.
I do think, however, the nature of the post-2000 Iraqi state is for violence to stay outside of government. And we see that not just in sort of Arab Iraq, but also in Kurdistan, where the Peshmerga are linked to political parties and to government institutions. So, and you see it with Shia groups, the PMF, and you see it with Sunni groups. So there is a sort of structural problem that was negotiated in the development of the 2003 state. So the sort of this Weberian idea, this neo-Weberian idea of having monopoly over violence would probably require a revolution first.
When you talk about political violence, though, I mean, you know, Iraq, elections are a period where typically Iraq descends into political violence. So,
But that violence is, by and large, allowed. There is a lot of violence, a lot of guns in Iraq. You have tit-for-tat assassinations, and no one is held to account because it's part of the political negotiated settlement. Sometimes the violence goes too much. I think, you know, the Sadrist in August 2022 went too far, and they had to withdraw and apologize. But by and large, how we understand violence is different to how the political settlement understands the deployment of violence.
can you elaborate on that? What does that mean?
Is what I'm saying is violence is part of negotiating politically, and it's allowed. No one will be. And when I mean allowed, I don't mean by law. I mean de facto. There's an understanding.
But then there's a repercussion because that means there's a level
not
of
saying it's a good
intimidation.
thing.
Yeah, but I'm saying there's a level of intimidation. The threat of violence,
Yes.
even if it's not used,
Yeah.
means that many people are outside of the political makeup in the country because actually they have too much to lose and they don't have a strong
That's right.
back
Yeah.
that could defend them, and they will be assassinated and it will barely make a headline.
Yeah.
Got one question over there. Yes, thank you.
Yes, good morning, everybody. Thomas Seiler, EU ambassador in Iraq. In the beginning, you had a discussion where this country should go politically, societally, economically. To which extent, and the question goes to everybody, to which extent do you want the international community being at your help, being involved? You know, in the past, we had heard often voices saying, stay out, let us do this ourselves. But then you ask for technical assistance. So where is the balance in all of that? And I would also like to say that this question is irrespective of current developments. There's a more general question, although I must tell you Brussels is very much monitoring the developments Iraq, Iran, after we know that Iran supplies weapons to Ukraine. This is a point that has been a shift in Brussels in the last days and weeks, very clearly. And we are very confident in the Sudani government at the moment as regards the context to Tehran, but we monitor very cautiously the situation. So question to everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We're going to take a couple more questions. So we've got a question at the front.
Thank you very much. My name is Maysoon Al-Damlouji. I'm a former member of the Iraqi parliament and currently I'm a researcher. My question to the audience is, how do they see the vicious attack on civic societies in Iraq? Things like the amendment to the personal status law, trying to control NGOs and things like that. It seems to me that there's a lot of anger going on among the population, and the gap is increasing between the political elite and the population in general. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And right behind over there.
May I speak in Arabic?
Yeah.
صباح الخير جميعا. حقيقة أنا بس
Good
حابة
morning,
أسأل
everybody.
الأساتذة.
I
طبعاً
would
أول
like
شيء
to
أشكر مينا
ask
على
the panelists, and first of all, I would like to extend thanks to Mina because what she said is the reality without any makeup. The problem is that we talk about elections, and I think that the reason to the failure of political outputs in Iraq is that elections are pompous. They use ornated language to speak about them, but they do not come up with effective results. Across these past 20 years, the successive governments should have invested strongly in the country economically and in other fields. Second, they have not achieved anything societally and socially. We suffer from unemployment, from violence, verbal violence that is prevailing. Sectarianism is re-emerging, amongst other negative things that politicians ignore across all election cycles. What solutions do they have in the coming phase for this problem? I am Noor Al-Kurdi.
Should we start with answering those three questions and then take a second round? So if we start with the EU ambassador's question first.
Well, as far as we are concerned, the way we see it from Kurdistan, the perspective that in Iraq, we don't have an economy or a sustainable economy. It's a rentier state. We have a commodity, which is oil, that's being sold, revenues come back distributed. So we have not done enough in order to have diversification of our economy or to have a sustainable economy. As far as the point that was mentioned, you highlighted, Al-Hawiyya Jami'a, a national identity, we don't feel it. There isn't one. There isn't a vision for Iraq that everybody buys in. So that's why a lot of work needs to be done so that trust is built among these communities, first and foremost, because we identify ourselves as Kurds, Shias, and Sunnis. So it's the fact. There is a difference between the reality on the ground and what you wish for. The other thing about the international community, we do believe Iraq needs the support of the international community. We are not yet there. We should not accelerate this process. Iraq cannot stand on its own feet right now because of all the internal problems that we have and also the challenges that we face in the neighborhood, be that security-wise or otherwise. As far as the Peshmerga you mentioned, Renat, there is a lot of effort ongoing with the support of the United States, UK, Germany, and Netherlands in order to restructure the Ministry of Peshmerga first, unite the Peshmerga forces, and a lot of progress has been made in this regard. Yes, they come under different commands so far, but during the fight against ISIS, we saw all the Peshmerga united under the leadership of the commander-in-chief of the Peshmerga forces. Efforts are ongoing in order to unify, and this has been one of the slogans of the election, to unify all the Peshmerga forces. As far as the militia in Iraq, in an ideal world, in utopia, all the forces have to be under the control of the state, and they have to report to the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. But unfortunately, until this moment in Iraq, this is not the case.
Thank you. I think, Mina, would you like to?
Yeah, just on the international community, I mean, first, I think the international community is no longer a term that sadly applies, given everything that's happened in the world, especially in the last 14 months. But I think the international community needs Iraq also. The Iraqi state needs to be strong, whether it's arms smuggling, whether it's a proliferation of non-state actor groups and getting people from different nationalities under the banner of armed groups and so forth. So I think it's not so much, yes, Iraq needs the international community's engagement for sure, but I think it's also the reverse. And I think it's important to keep that in mind, that it's not just Iraq asking for help, but the international community has very vested interests in Iraq.
I agree with you. Iraq is an important country. God forbid, if the situation goes and deteriorates in Iraq, it will have a negative impact on the Gulf as well. Therefore, Iraq is in a very important geographical, geopolitical situation. But Iraq can help the international community if it's strong, if it's stable, secure, prosperous, and is governed by the rule of law and the Constitution.
So, Judge, do you want to take that question on civil society?
Sure. I mean, I would say Iraq is governed by powerful parties. And really, I don't see much difference between them. We don't have a national party in Iraq. There is no party that competes for constituents in all parts of the country. Our parties are based on ethno-sectarian lines. This is a fact. This is the post-2003 system. It hasn't changed. It is unlikely to change anytime soon. Based on this, parties have money, weapons, territory. And they will do whatever is necessary to keep a hold of that. And these parties are able to penetrate all parts of the state, are able to woo people by handing out jobs, by sharing resources, through patronage, or through intimidation. Coercive means through legislation, through legal challenges, through media campaigns to harass people. We've seen this happen in all parts of the country. I don't think it's going to change anytime soon. Because this is the way to maintain power. This, unfortunately, is the way Iraq is governed. To change that, we need to have these parties begin to talk about different issues. For example, the economic policies. Which of the major parties in Iraq now says, hey, we need to reduce the size of the public sector payroll. We need to not depend completely on oil. We need to remove state subsidies, which are over $20 billion a year, because we shouldn't be subsidizing fuel or electricity, which is 90% subsidized. Which of the parties in any part of the country actually says this? None, because they know the next day they would, lose.
They don't mean it.
No, they don't actually say it either. They don't actually say that because that is deeply unpopular. And unfortunately, I think that is what they're aimed for, is they're geared for maintaining power through any of these means. And so challenges to civil society, to me, would appear fairly natural. This is part of the playbook. It is to prevent protest, it is to prevent accountability, it is to prevent anyone really challenging these major parties. The parties themselves, as Renard pointed to, they compete against each other in a ferocious manner, right? Again, throughout the country. They are willing to use violence against each other, they are willing to use legal challenges against each other, they're willing to intimidate MPs, ministers, very important officials in the country. So what about civil society? If they're willing to do that to each other, of course, then to civil society, that's a natural thing to expect. So from my perspective, I don't think it's going to change anytime soon, because the players in the country, the people that control power, institutions, weapons, money, media, they are all very similar. I don't see much difference between them. So that is not going to change internally. I think we need some external pressures to maybe change some of that.
With all the challenges we face in the KRI, but still compared the situation in Kurdistan region and the rest of Iraq, the turnout has always been high, even in the provincial and parliamentary elections Iraq-wide. And the ratio in Kurdistan region helped the Iraqi to go up otherwise, which means that in Kurdistan region, the political parties that run, they're empowered by their public, not only their immediate members of the party, but the public who went out to vote. But in the rest of Iraq is not the same. And of course, yes, we have challenges in terms of the economy, the situation, but in terms of women, youth, we are doing better than the rest of the country.
But patronage is still a very important element of the politics in both the KRI and the rest of Iraq. I mean, it's the foundational ethos of the political system. I'd like to turn to the audience for a couple more questions. We've got right here, 1, 2. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, I'm Julian Bichucha, reporter and editor for Rudaw English in Erbil. My question is to Renad and Sajjad, and also Ka'falah, if you want to add something. How do you analyze the expansion of Iranian influence into Iraq and especially the Kurdistan region, now that a major pro-Iran party has established a foothold in the region by securing a seat in the Kurdish parliament elections, especially with this party having been accused by the majority of Iraqi Christians of having stolen the minority seats, and they not fully representing the interests of Christians, but rather those of Shiite parties? Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go to the second question now.
Thank you. I'm Jafar Al-Ahmar. Question to Falah. What is the KDP priorities in terms of forming government? Is it to coordinate with PUK or New Generation, or you have a comprehensive new government, or any other formula? Thank you.
Thank you. And we've got a couple of questions in the front, please.
Good morning. My name is Mohammed Al-Najjar. I'm Chief Executive Officer of Iraq Development Fund. I just have a comment or a question. I don't know how you classify that. The image or the picture you've given us is extremely gloomy, and I don't think that's really the way it is right now in Iraq, or the prospect. Iraq has 60% of its population are young. No account of this dynamic has been taken by you when you were giving that remarks. I live daily with those young people, and I can see things are moving into different directions. I believe next election will have a different impact altogether, provided that some of the issues that you mentioned regarding the political party is not practiced. Every 1% added to this new election will have an impact completely different. And we believe that 1% will come from the young people. We see a lot of change in terms of people's willingness to go and vote. And that is something I've seen in the last 2 elections did not happen, including myself. So I just wanted to mention that, and I would love to hear what are the dynamics after this election.
Thank you.
Because you've just stated the status quo. Thank you.
Thank you. And in the interest of time, can I encourage everyone to keep their questions concise? We've got 2 more questions, one in the back there. Anyone else?
Thank you very much. So my question is to Kak Falah Mustafa, and sorry, Raya, this is for work, so it has to be about oil. There was a proposal by the Iraqi government to amend the budget with regards to remuneration to oil companies. My question is, what is the KRG's viewpoint, both technically and politically? What is the outlook to resolving this problem, the impasse, the oil exports? Thank you.
Thank you. We had a question in the front too.
Hi, Lama Shahadi from The National. Mr. Mustafa, there's reports that the UK is working with the KRG on tackling people smugglers. And what is it that the KRG is offering? And
Thank you. And then we'll take the last question from the audience there.
Good morning. Sabah khair. This is a question for Falah. Just in terms of what was mentioned before with regards to what you see the future of Iraq as being part of a federal state and being a kind of monolithic entity. I just want to know how that compares to some of the actions that the KRG has done recently, especially with the referendum in 2017, and also a lot of the efforts that lots of actors in the KRG want to break from Iraq federally, and how that kind of measures with what you think. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, we're short on time, so why don't we start? I mean, Kak Falah, who had a lot of questions directed your way, so if you'd like to.
Well, if I start with the last question, we have publicly stated that we are committed to Iraq, to the constitution of Iraq, and to be part of a federal, democratic, pluralistic Iraq. If you go back to the history of pre-referendum, there were reasons why the leadership in Kurdistan region decided to go that way. Because there was no partnership, there was no commitment to the constitution. We did not feel that we were part of whatever was going on. We were marginalized, excluded, and there was no functioning relationship between Erbil and Baghdad. We do understand that Iraq has been run through a centralized system in the past, but that was changed after 2003. New political dynamics were established. But day after day, that was reducing. We felt we were not anymore part of whatever was going on. So therefore, partnership was not accepted. There was an effort to go for a referendum so that we define a new relationship, a new arrangement. But that was not accepted from the start. So therefore, even now, the future of Iraq will remain like this unless there would be serious efforts to renegotiate, sit down together and define where are we heading to. Is Iraq federal today? What we see, Baghdad is dealing with this in a very centralized manner. While those in Baghdad look at Erbil and Kurdistan region as if we are acting as a confederal state or even beyond. So we need to get together and sit down and find a common ground. The situation in Iraq is very fragile. You mentioned it's fragile. Youth they need to be empowered. Participating in the election is not enough. That's not the end of the story. But will they be empowered? We have seen in the previous elections in 2021, a lot of independents were elected, but where did they end up? They aligned with this or that party. So therefore, let's not ignore the political realities on the ground. As far as the actors in Kurdistan region, all the political parties in Kurdistan region do believe in negotiating with Baghdad, finding solutions through constructive dialogue with Baghdad. As far as the oil proposal is concerned, we are optimistic. We hope that Prime Minister Soudani and his team in Baghdad would play their hand through the coordination framework and also the Council of Representatives, the parliament in Baghdad, in order to have some amendment in the budget so that we can allow the resumption of oil exports. The Turkish side is ready. What remains is Baghdad and Erbil agree on this, even if it is temporary with a third party auditing it, but that is a positive step forward in addressing this issue, which has caused Iraq a big loss. So we believe all Iraq is losing, not only Kurdistan region, as a result of this. As far as the KDP position, I'm not here on behalf of the KDP. That's why I cannot talk on behalf of the KDP, but I can state very clear the position of Kurdistan Region President, His Excellency Najib Barzani, when he called on all political parties to engage immediately in very constructive dialogue in order to immediately form the government, seeing the challenges within and outside Iraq. It is important for us to get there. As far as the other, I've also seen it in the press that the UK is engaged with some countries, including Kurdistan region, but definitely we do not like Kurdistan region to be a source of problem for anyone. We hope that the international community, I use it again, help Kurdistan region and Iraq to create jobs, to open opportunities for scholarships, for entrepreneurial skills, so that people will remain in Kurdistan region and Iraq, so that they feel that they have a better future to stay within the country.
Thank you. And I think for the given time, I think if the remaining panelists would like to just wrap up in a minute and respond to any of the questions or any themes that they want to hit on one more time. So we can start with Renard.
Sure. I think the question on young people is really important. I mean, probably the biggest challenge in the longer term to the political system is the demographics. Iraq has the highest, one of the highest growing youth populations in the region. And certainly, as you say, it's true that under this government, Sudani seems to have a sort of higher than normal approval rating compared to predecessors at this moment. Part of that, of course, has been the response to Shireen, the stuff that we were discussing in terms of the institutionalization of control over specific activists, but also the economy has been booming for the last few years, which has offered opportunities, offered cafes and the bridges, and there is a kind of question being asked, is this something different? But as Sajjad is saying, the big concern here is that it doesn't seem to be something different, and the Iraqi economy is still pegged to the price of oil. So if the price of oil continues, yes, the situation and jobs and the youth could be somewhat happier. But we know that the price of oil could collapse, as it has in the past, and therefore the first to suffer will always be the youth, will always be the young. And I think it's important to see, my colleague Haider Shakiri, who will be speaking later today, has written this report on the youth have been excluded, as we're saying, especially reformists, from the formal politics. But they are trying to hold to account in different ways, in art, in startups, in finance. And there's these different ways in which the youth are trying to have a voice because their voice isn't coming out in protests or in elections.
Thank you. Mina.
The title of the session was The Political Arena Ahead of Upcoming National Elections. So when you ask why we need to talk about the youth, it's hard to see what entry point they'll have in the political arena. I mean, youth unemployment in Iraq is a major, major challenge, not only for the economy, but for their day-to-day dignity. So I think that, yes, they give hope because they're incredible. And, I'm very proud to be on the board of trustees for the American University in Iraq and Sulaymaniyah, and every time I go there and you sit with young people from across Iraq sitting, and they're so incredibly astute. And of course that gives you hope, but at the same time, we can't make promises that actually in 10 years' time, in 15 years' time, 20 years' time, they'll have a better future than their parents. And that's really the challenge. And, God help whoever is in power trying to make that a reality. But I do think, again, we go back to 2019. Those were formative days for a lot of young people where they felt, actually, if I take to the streets and if I try to voice my opposition, then the clampdown will be very harsh, not only for me, but potentially for my family. Yeah. And I think that's a key driver for a disillusionment in getting involved in the political arena. As for post-elections, and very briefly, it depends on so much, but what will be important is how much people trust the outcome of the elections and how they will be. But of course, there's also the regional dynamics and the global dynamics with a new U.S. administration.
Thank you. And Sajjad.
So I think we have a problem with the social contract in the country. And this needs to be addressed for any serious reforms to take place. I mean, I have friends, young people, relatives, young people, who say, the government gives me a job, that's all I want. And they should give me a job. We have oil, they need to pay me, and I'll be happy. I mean, that's the expectation. Even when there were protests in 2019, people will recall they started on the basis of young people demanding jobs. So we have given the expectation to the public that we can sell oil, we can transfer that money to the public, and all will be well, sort of like the Gulf model. Unfortunately, it just can't keep up with the demographic pressure. But the expectation from the public hasn't changed. They don't want to pay taxes, they don't want to pay their bills, they want jobs to be given to them, they want adequate compensation for things that happened 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. And so they themselves have been addicted, or in a way made to be addicted to the system post-2003.
They're asking for a fraction from what the elites are addicted to.
Of course. Yeah. But the fact is...
That's an unfair indictment.
Well, I'm not indicting. What I'm saying is we've created the system where the public is unsure of the social contract. Are we saying the social contract is based on a Western model, a European model, or is it based on what we have in the Gulf? Or do we have the worst of both systems? And unfortunately, I think this is also an issue for the parties. They are creating unrealistic expectations. They keep promising more jobs if we're elected, more expansion of the budget if we're elected. And when is this going to stop? So I think that is also an issue, is that we need to understand we cannot continue at the pace that we're going.
So one last point I want to make.
One very last point.
And it's unfair for Baghdad, or those who are in power in Baghdad, to continue to punish KRG/KDP for the referendum or the tripartite alliance. It's over. The political dynamics is changing in the country. We need to deal with the realities on the ground. Second, although we did not respond to the question from Ruda, but I say we want to have balanced relations with our neighbors based on trust, understanding, and common interest.
Thank you very much. Thank you to our excellent panelists for this very lively discussion. Thank you to the audience, both online and in person. I'm supposed to flag that there's a feedback form available on a QR code on the individual badges you've been given, and there are refreshments upstairs until 11:15 when the next panel begins.